Best heard from a great distance. I've never felt so overdressed in my life. It's very good. Well, I'm Scott Stevenson. I'm the Vice President of Collections, Exhibitions, and Programming at the Museum of the American Revolution here in Philadelphia. And we're celebrating today a wonderful partnership with two other great august institutions here from Philadelphia, the Philadelphia History Museum and the St. Andrew's Society of Philadelphia. We're here to remember and to honor Scottish immigrant Hugh Mercer, who most people have not heard about probably today. They may live in a township or a county or a town named Mercersburg or Mercer County, or Mercer Township, and probably never think about the person that's named after. Hugh Mercer was a Scottish immigrant who arrived in Philadelphia in 1757. He was a refugee from the Civil War that involved foreign intervention. There's a lot of things about Hugh Mercer's life that are in the news today. One of the things that we can do at museums like the American Revolution is to reach back into the past and think about how we can form a kind of empathetic connection for people who are not like ourselves. And so it's, I think, worthy to remember a man like Hugh Mercer, who arrives as a very young man, arrives as a refugee. He arrives at a time in which many other Scotsmen were coming to Philadelphia, and who formed the St. Andrew's Society of Philadelphia, which was a charitable organization. You'll hear a little bit more from Steve Armstrong in a moment about the history of that organization as a mutual aid society. So Hugh Mercer practiced medicine in what's now Cumberland County, Pennsylvania. Has a town, Mercersburg, named after him, an academy, Mercersburg Academy, named after him now. He served during the last colonial war between France and Britain, the so-called French and Indian War. And that's when he first met a fellow young man, George Washington from Virginia. And after the end of that war, Washington encouraged him to set up medical practice in what's now in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And so Washington's mother, Washington's adopted daughter, other members of the family, all, when they went to the doctor, they went to see Hugh Mercer. Mercer answered the call of liberty in 1775. He encountered initially prejudice against Scots. There was a feeling that the political beliefs of Scotsmen could not be trusted in 1775. There was actually an early draft of a document called the Declaration of Independence, drafted in this very city, that cited Scotsmen as being part of the grievances of the king against the king for the Scotsmen's involvement in putting down the rebellion here. That was later stricken out, thank goodness. Of course, many Scots served with great distinction during the Revolutionary War. He becomes the commander of the 3rd Virginia Regiment and serves all through the campaign of 1776. And probably the reason why we're remembering him today is that service during that hard year, probably one of the lowest moments of the Revolution, when Congress fled this city, when everyone expected the British to march in and take Philadelphia, and essentially for the Revolution to be over. And so he may well have been the commander who suggested that bold counterattack of crossing the Delaware on Christmas night of 1776 and attacking the Hessian garrison at Trenton, and then going back again during the 10 crucial days fighting the Second Battle of Trenton, and was at the head of the column at the Battle of Princeton in 1777, January 3rd of 1777, and that is the day in which he would receive his fatal wound. He led the vanguard of the American troops across ground, which is now thankfully being saved due to efforts of the battlefield protection efforts of campaign 1776. But during a British counterattack was knocked off of his horse, and probably because the British soldiers thought that this was George Washington that was laying on the ground, asked him if he wanted quarter, meaning would he surrender, and he said no, he would essentially rather suffer death than give up his liberty. And so with the sword that you'll all see in a moment, defended himself from a group of British soldiers who bayoneted him repeatedly, struck him about the head with their muskets. And he lingered for 9 days afterwards until the 12th of January, 1777. But he became a kind of martyr for the American cause, and his body was brought here to Philadelphia. He was exhibited laid in state in the City Tavern, which is just a block from where we are located today. Was buried under the auspices of the Society of St. Andrews, which he was a member, at Christ Church, and then later reinterred at Mount Laurel. And Steve will talk a bit more about that in a moment. But first I wanted to invite Charles Croce, who's the Executive Director and CEO of the Philadelphia History Museum, to talk a little bit about the painting that is a depiction of the Battle of Princeton. It includes a depiction of the death, the mortal wounding of Mercer in the center, and has quite an interesting family connection to Mercer's family as well. So, Charles, please.
Thank you, Scott. And let me say that on April 19th, I think Philadelphia and the city and the nation and perhaps the world will welcome the newest gem in the crown of Philadelphia's historic district community, and that's the opening of the Museum of the American Revolution. We're all about collaboration and partnerships at the Philadelphia History Museum at the Outward Kent, and we will be lending 6, I believe, items, objects from our collection to this museum, and the one that you see in front of you is the Battle of Princeton, and the story behind it is interesting because it was done by the son of General Mercer, Billy Mercer, who was both a deaf and mute. But he learned at the studio of the Peels, local boys, right here in Philadelphia. And so the original work, or the work of George Washington at the Battle of Princeton, hangs at Princeton University. But the Peel brothers both served in Washington's army during the Trenton-Princeton campaigns. And Peel went back a couple of years later and made sketches of the area. And much of it remains the same, including the farmhouse that you see there. It exists today. So he made those sketches, and it's from that. His brother, James, was more known as a miniaturist. But at that studio, Billy Mercer then, from these sketches, created the work that you see here, which is in our collection. So the Mercer connection, I think the thing about objects, which you'll see in a second, that is so compelling, is that if you just looked at the sword and didn't have the history, okay, it's a sword from the Civil War, General Mercer, what does it mean? But to see the sword depicted next to the dying, wounded General Mercer, you see George Washington on Nelson, which, by the way, you always see him on a white charger, and that's a parade horse. This horse was trained and was able to endure the sounds of gunfire. So you see Washington. So we're so proud to be able to be part of that. And the fact that Billy Mercer executed his own copy of the Battle of Princeton, which is here. And we're very happy to loan it to, as I say, the next premier, most important historic segment of our historic district, which is the Museum of the American Revolution. So again, later you'll come up and you'll look at it. It is on loan. I'll be back once a year to check on it. Thank you.
Mentioned this is a reproduction of a painting that also hangs at Princeton. This is Charles Willson Peel's full-length portrait of Washington. This was commissioned by the trustees of Princeton University to replace a painting of George III, which reportedly was decapitated by an American cannonball during the Battle of Princeton that went through Nassau Hall. And if that isn't true, it ought to be true. But what we love about this, and you're welcome to examine this closely, you can see the depiction of Nassau Hall in the background, but it also includes an image of the dying General Mercer, the feet of Washington, and the Peel brothers, who often could not resist putting themselves into these wonderful history paintings. So there you see Charles and James, who were actually the tutors and taught art to the orphan Billy Mercer, who again painted this painting in this neighborhood. And I think the irony of this child orphaned by the war, depicting his own father's death and learning about that trait here. It's, just another way that history can really reach out and touch us today. So, of course, as General Mercer lay dying of his wounds in the Clark House at Princeton Battlefield, he was visited by his adjutant, John Morgan, and I think, Steve, maybe that's a good place to pick up the connection to the St. Andrews Society. So please join me in welcoming Steve Armstrong, who is the, I'm sure, title of the St. Andrews Society of Philadelphia.
And he's not elect.
I'm pleased and honored to be able to be here at the museum today to present for keeping and display the sword of General Mercer, which the St. Andrews Society of Philadelphia has had in its custody for 170 years. The society, as Scott mentioned, was founded in 1747 to assist Scots who were coming from Scotland and Northern Ireland for protection and to find a new life in this world. Most of them actually didn't spend a lot of time in Philadelphia. They headed out to the frontier. And that's exactly what Mercer did. He went, as Scott said, to Cumberland County. He joined the British Army. He served with Washington and became fast friends. Washington, I think Washington was involved in this, but certainly Mercer, under the Major General John Armstrong, I'm not sure if he's a relationship, but we're all related, so I'm sure he was, provided some protection for the settlers who were being harassed by Indians and by the French in western part of the state. And for this service, he was awarded a medal and the sword, which he kept with himself, and which he used during the Revolutionary War after he was called to service. When Mercer was killed, by the way, I should add that Mercer, as Scott said, arrived here in 1757, and he became a member of the St. Andrews Society at that time. In 1777, when Mercer was killed, the society arranged for his burial. A lot of the mission of the society in those days was to provide support for indigent Scots, and in fact, our motto is relieve the distressed. And we still engage in some of that service today, although Scots are not nearly as indigent and as needy as they used to be. And when Mercer died, the society arranged for his burial in Christchurch. And then 50 years later, in 1840, the society prepared a resting place and a monument for Mercer at Laurel Hill Cemetery, where we have some other plots as well. And his remains were removed to Laurel Hill Cemetery at that time. And there was a presentation by the family of General Morgan. So as Mercer was dying in that 9-day period, he began to give away parts of his uniforms and other property because he knew he was not going to rest. And so he gave his sword to his adjutant at the time, who was Captain Jacob Morgan. Morgan eventually became a general. The sword stayed in Morgan's possession and his family's possession until 1840, when Morgan's daughter-in-law, Helen Morgan, decided to give the society custody and care of Mercer's sword, so that it would be protected and so it would be available for posterity. For a while, the sword was kept in the custody of the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, but in about 2000 or so, the society took possession of the sword again. And through the auspices and the commitment of our past president, Jim Bishop, the society loaned the sword in 2000 to the Museum for Scotland, which had a wonderful presentation of Scots abroad in its inaugural year. And that sword was prepared and shipped to Scotland, was on display there for a number of years. And then in about 2014, 2013, Jim was in touch with Scott Stevenson and learned that an exhibit Scott was preparing called The Clash of Empires, which was in Pittsburgh and the Smithsonian and is it in Canada as well, that showed the pre-revolutionary work and impact, and Mercer's success and his efforts were highlighted in that program, and we again loaned the sword to them. And as a result of that friendship and relationship with Jim Bishop, the idea developed that this museum would be an ideal place to have Mercer's sword, frankly, well cared for and put on display where everyone can appreciate it. I've seen the location of the exhibit where this will be presented. There will be a bayonet from the 17th Regiment, British Regiment, that was at Princeton and that Mercer was defending against, and the sword superimposed over the background of what is it, the Trumbull painting of the death of Mercer, which is even more dramatic than this one. And it's our great pleasure at this time to present to the museum, again, as Charles said, as to their property, on loan, since our trust requires us to maintain ownership of it, but on a long-term basis, which means as long as we need to do it, the sword of General Mercer. And with that, I would like to physically present it to Scott at this point. I should note in passing, today is the 240th anniversary of the death of Mercer. Because this is a museum artifact, and because things deteriorate when grubby hands get on them, and because it looks cool, I should mention that here on the case, as well as on the hilt of the sword, is an inscription that explains that the sword was given to the St. Andrew's Society of Philadelphia by Helen Morgan in 1841 on St. Andrew's Day, which is November 30th. And with that, I present this to Scott, along with the presentation box, for display in this museum. Thank you, Scott. From the Scots to the Scot. That's right. Keep it in the family as we're kind of everywhere.
We're looking forward to sharing this with, we hope, at least 500,000 people in the next 12 months.
Every year, yes.
So,
Yes.
Here, here. I suppose if anyone had a question or two, we
To thank all of you for coming, and especially to thank the pipers of the St. Andrew's Society of Philadelphia. Frank Lutz. I'd like to thank our officers and members for attending. This is really a way of showing you how important we think this event is. And the Society maintains its interest in supporting the life of Philadelphia and the community. And while I said we don't help indigent Scots these days, we do have a scholarship program that sends about 6 people to Scotland and brings one here to the United States every year. That's our principal mission these days. But if you know some indigent Scots who need assistance, please let us know.
Here, here.